We stand on the threshold of a great new age of exploration. Its ultimate destination, the furthest reaches of the universe.
3, 2, 1.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Hi, welcome. Good to see you all here. Welcome to the Frontier here on the campus of the beautiful Research Triangle Park for RTP180. Yes. I am your host, Andrea Cash. I run Andrea Cash Creative in Durham. That means that I help small businesses and nonprofits with their communications and marketing. And on behalf of the entire RTP 180 team, we want to thank our presenting sponsor, RTI International. Give it up. Now, earlier in the lobby, Research Triangle Foundation filled some of you in on RTP's history, keeping with our theme, and future. And two of Frontier RTP's earliest and longest tenants, DTS Language, as well as Cloud Giants, were on hand to share how having their headquarters here in the heart of RTP has shaped their growth. Plus, we had the Museum of Durham History and the Raleigh Historic Development Commission. So we appreciate y'all being here. Thank you. Yes. And now I'm going to have kind of an Oprah moment. I'm really excited to say that. We are excited to kick off tonight's event with a special giveaway. 5 lucky winners are going to take home a Hub RTP mini solo stove. This is really cool. You need to check under your seat for a postcard. There's 5 postcards. Each stove comes with a stand, a carry bag, starters, some firewood. Oh, I knew it was going to be such an exciting moment. All right. There we go. Nice. So if you're a winner, you are going to, important instructions, yes, for the winners. For the winners, you are going to head to the entrance after the show to claim your prize. Very exciting moments. Congrats. All right. Hub RTP. All right, everybody. Back to it here. I know, giveaways are so exciting. Hub RTP is the 100-acre downtown district of Research Triangle Park where you will find Frontier RTP, where we are right now, alongside Boxyard RTP, a vibrant hub for hyper-local food, experiences, and art. Coming next year, we got Horseshoe, an exciting new addition with chef-inspired dining and shopping. We've got more on the way. MAA Nixie, now leasing for future residents. Via Labs, Life Sciences, a hotel, and more. So thank you, Hub RTP, for being here and for being part of the community. Let me remind you about the format tonight. We have 4 speakers. They're going to each have about 7 minutes. We really try to stick to that tight timeline so we have time for questions and answers. Y'all always ask such great questions. I want to tell you a little bit more about the Frontier, our venue, and then we're going to get to the program. The Frontier has been a home for creative freelancers, startups, STEM professionals, and emerging companies since 2015. In addition to everyday co-working, there's yoga, there's out-of-office happy hours. And I want to get now to our first speaker for the history behind it. He's the president and chief executive officer at RTI International. He took the helm in 2022. Give it up for Tim Gable.
Well, thanks very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you tonight, and a great honor to kind of kick off this themed discussion around history. I'm pretty sure part of the reason they asked me to kick it off is not included in that intro is I came to RTI 42 years ago, and so I've seen the park change a great deal over that period of time, and so I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. As many of you know the origin story of RTP, but let me just give you a quick snapshot. 1950s, North Carolina experiencing a brain drain. If you weren't operating in tobacco, furniture, or textiles, you really didn't have an opportunity to use that great degree you were getting from Duke, NC State, or UNC Chapel Hill. On the picture on the left that you see here, Governor Luther Hodges was presenting during a press conference in 1957, talking about this concept of a research park, something that could really help keep talent at home and stimulate the economy of this region and this state. The middle photo that you see is the park that we're in today. All these buildings that you see was a big empty space of pinelands. And on the far right, your right, my left, what you see is RTI's first president, George Herbert, a gentleman that was recruited out of California, who was intended to be part of the architects of this park, became RTI's first president and CEO. What you see here is a reunion of some of the founding members of the business community, the academic community, the government community, that were the creators and the visionaries that thought about the park. How would we come together? Now, what do you see? You see a not very diverse group, for sure, I would say. You see one woman in the middle, you know, probably holding it all together. Her name was Elizabeth Aycock, and Elizabeth Aycock was one of the longest-serving members of the park leadership. She played a critical role in the history of the park. But these gentlemen and women really were a set of people that came together to make the park possible. The far, your right, sitting down, is George Herbert at that point. So that young man that was standing in the field is George Herbert at that point. So you can tell it's some years on. But I want to read a quote. I actually wrote this down because I think it's very important. This book, let me go back here. The book that you see on the left, maybe I'll go back, maybe I won't. Some of you have been picking up this book tonight, I think. Dr. Link, Albert Link, wrote a 2-volume set of the history of RTP. And the title of this book is A Generosity of Spirit. And what happened in the origin story of the park is that a wide variety of people, many of whom had interests and organizations that had interests in their organizations being successful, came together. And one of the quotes out of this book, and I want to read this to you because it's important for us to think about in today's context, and that is, "So was built into the structure of the triangle the remarkable collaboration of state, business, and higher education that had created it. Extremely able individuals had come forward in a generation, in a generally unselfish manner for the good of the state." Generally unselfish manner for the good of the state. And that was what happened that created the space and the park that we're in today. And now you think about the park that we're in today, you think about all the amazing companies that are in this park today and the jobs that are in this region, the remarkable brand that this region has across the globe, and all of us that are here tonight, and the vision that those individuals had at that time. That origin story benefits all of us that are here today and the organizations that we're a part of. I want to go back in time just a little bit again and talk a little bit about that unselfishness. The woman that you see in this picture is a woman named Gertrude Cox. And Gertrude Cox, to many of us and many outside of this region, is known as the godmother of statistics. Gertrude Cox back in the 50s, was a very well-known statistician at NC State University. And at the time the park was being created, there was a vision of creating an institute, a research institute. And that's what RTI, the Research Triangle Institute, was at the time. And the thought was there needed to be an anchor tenant to the park, and it needed to be a nonprofit research institute in order to persuade businesses that the research universities of the region were bought into this concept. And the dean of the Department of Agriculture at NC State persuaded one of his top faculty members and her whole team, that was Gertrude Cox, to lift up her program from NC State and bring it to this new research institute. Now, for those of you that have ever worked in an organization, for a leader of an organization to persuade one of their top rainmakers to move their program to another organization for the good of that new organization, for the good of the region, it's a very generous and unselfish act. But that's what happened, and that's what laid the foundation for the organization that I lead, the Research Triangle Institute then, RTI International now, that really created a foundation of statistics, of surveys, of data collection, data management that we still rely on now, almost 70 years later. So, yes, maybe not, there we go. RTI today, we've grown a lot. We were originally founded with a grant of $500,000 and 180 acres. Our campus is just right around the corner. We now are north of $1 billion in annual revenue. We have about 6,000 staff worldwide. We operate in 90 different countries. We have a vast variety of capabilities that we carry out work in. It's mostly applied research, more so than basic research. We do have laboratories that operate in medicinal chemistry and energy, and we operate in health and education in a variety of areas. But I guarantee you those visionaries that were creating the park at the time and were imagining a research institute at the time had no idea what this region would become and what our organization would become. What I would say to you is we are in the process of trying to create our future and imagine what our future will be. Go ahead and advance the slide for me if you would. There we go. Last year what we did is we set upon a path to create for ourselves a North Star goal. RTI's mission is to improve the human condition by turning knowledge into practice. And that's a very bold mission. We live it. We breathe it every day. I guarantee you, you could ask any RTI employee what's our mission, they would be able to tell you. But what we decided we wanted to have is sort of a mile marker on that journey. And so we created the North Star goal that you see here. By 2030, RTI will positively impact the well-being of 1 billion people through science-based solutions in climate, education, health, and equity. And we're using that goal to coalesce all of our staff around a very aspirational, audacious target with a time-bound nature that's driving us forward. And it's part of what we believe is our mission to improve the human condition to have an impact in the world. And if you'd advance the slide one more time, what I want to do now is bring a little bit of a call to action to all of you, because that's what we're doing as an organization. But I want to bring our attention to what's going on right here in our region right now. The RTP 3.0 efforts that are underway right now bring to us an opportunity to bring that same unselfishness, that same for the good of the region, for the good of the state attitude, and thinking long beyond where we are today. I think all of us, the organizations that are represented here, leaders of those organizations, members of the staff of those organizations that are in this room today, we all have the ability to reimagine what a successful research park can look like into the future. The state of North Carolina stands to benefit from that effort. The people in areas of our state that may not be as well off as we are here in the Triangle stand to benefit from that. And so my call to action to all of you is go back into your organizations. Imagine what those visionaries were thinking about in the 1950s. Put yourself in those shoes right now in 2024, almost 2025, and think about what can we do now? How can we be generally unselfish and try to bring that sort of passion and energy to the future, to the next generation and the next and the next. So thanks for your attention. I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight.
Tim, let me kick things off. What do you consider one of RTI's greatest achievements?
Oh gosh, we've been active in so many research areas. It's almost hard to pick one. I think some of the things we're most famous for, RTI engineers were behind the development of the technology that allows airlines to detect wind shear. So when you're safe flying in an airline and an airliner is able to detect wind shear, that's one. The technology behind cochlear implants was developed at RTI. That's another one. So that's just a couple of things, I would say.
Sarah Beth is looking for folks who have questions. Anyone have a question for Tim? Over here.
See one back here.
Hi, my name is Shauna Henry. I work at IBM and am aware of IBM's history in the Research Triangle Park. My question to you is, are there any RTI partnerships with IBM or other businesses or companies that have been longstanding as well? And I'm curious where RTI and IBM are relationally.
So I think the question was about partnerships and longstanding partnerships. We've had many partnerships, one of which has been with IBM. I don't think we have a current partnership with IBM, but in the early days of Watson, we established a partnership with IBM and really thought about how that advanced technology could be brought to bear in the kind of work that we do. And we did some early work with the Watson team right across the street. The IBM campus is right across the street. You know, one of the things about our North Star goal, I will tell you, and I say this to our staff all the time, is we know we can't reach 1 billion by ourselves. And we need to harness the power of partnership and the strengths of many organizations, not just here in the Triangle, but around the globe that we work with. And so that's a great question, and I appreciate the question.
We have one more question.
How will sustainability and solar panels and renewable energy play a role in RTP 3.0 that we see on this rendering?
I'm not sure I heard all that.
Sustainable energy play a role
In the region, do you think?
In the RTP 3.0 rendering that you show there on the screen.
Yeah, in the 3.0. Well, I know there's a lot of different ways to answer that question, and I know some of the Research Triangle Foundation staff are here that could probably speak better to that. I know there are transit plans underway thinking about that. You look at the residential that's here and thinking about, you know, part of the challenge we have in the Triangle gets to commute, gets to affordable housing, gets to some of those things, and I think the sustainability questions, the polarity of thinking about clean energy, commuting into the park, rail, transit, those kind of challenges. I know the RTP design process is trying to take all that into account. I will tell you, I'm not the urban design expert. Some of those people are here tonight, and I would encourage you to have some follow-up conversation with those folks.
Thank you, Tim, so much.
Okay,
Give it
thank
up.
you.
Quick announcement, and we'll get to our next speaker. So the Frontier has partnered with Project Linus's Wake County chapter to make blankets for kids at Wake Med. And so all you got to do to be part of this is come to the out-of-office happy hour on December 5th, January 9th, January 30th, or February 13th. No prior crafting experience is required. The goal is to make 150 to 200 blankets, so that is a worthy project. And now for our next speaker, a dear friend of Alan Troxler's. He taught for 17 years in the Department of Public Health Education at NC Central, where he was involved in numerous HIV research and service projects. Prior to his time at Central, he spent 15 plus years working in public health, largely in the field of HIV/AIDS. With 3 friends, he founded the first AIDS service organization in our state. In 1986, he became the first AIDS health educator hired by the NC State Division of Health Services. He later served as the head of the NC State AIDS Control Branch, the manager of the NC AIDS Training Network, and the director of the American Social Health Association CDC Hotlines Project Office. Give it up for Dr. David Jolly.
You were going to, there we go. Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, sure. Thanks. Good evening, and thank you for having me here this evening. I'm working with a mic stand because I need to hold these papers, because this is Alan Troxler's story, and it's told in Alan's words, and I want to make sure that I get them right. Alan is not on stage with me tonight, but he is here in the audience, and I would like to ask him to stand so you all can see who I'm talking with and about. And let me tell you a little bit about Alan. He is a graphic artist, a writer, a mask, puppet, and banner maker, a country dance teacher, and a community activist. He grew up in Greensboro, the son of respected civil rights and peace activists. A conscientious objector during the Vietnam War, Alan did alternative service in Boston, working to preserve neighborhoods that were threatened by urban development. Later, Alan moved to a communal farm in rural Oregon with his partner, Carl Whitman. While in Oregon, Alan and Carl published RFD, a magazine for gay men living in rural America. Returning to North Carolina in 1979, Alan and Carl settled in East Durham, where they renovated 2 houses, taught English and Scottish country dance, and organized a variety of community projects and protests. Carl died of AIDS in 1986. The setting for this story is Blevins House, a residence in Durham established for persons at the end stage of AIDS, people who in general had no place else to go. They were estranged from or rejected by their families because they were gay, or they were drug users, or they had AIDS. Alan started a garden, Shirley's Garden, at Blevins House in the early 1990s, a time before HAART, highly active antiretroviral therapy, a time when a diagnosis with HIV was still a death sentence, and not the chronic disease that it became because of HAART. And HAART is a mix of HIV medications that originally included AZT, the first AIDS drug approved by the FDA, a drug patented by Burroughs Wellcome, which was an early corporate resident of RTP. Shirley's Garden was also a mix of sunflowers, zinnias, coxcombs, tomatoes, cucumber, okra, watermelon, and cantaloupe. So this story is told largely in Alan's words, taken directly from an interview that historian David Soselski conducted with Alan in 1998. The story is one of thousands that could be told, and hopefully it will shed some small light on the very human side of this epidemic. Now, Alan and I originally envisioned this talk as a conversation that we would have a la National Public Radio's StoryCorps, with me asking the questions that Alan would use as a jumping off point for the story of Shirley's Garden. We've decided to maintain that format with me asking both the questions and providing Alan's responses. I will spare you my pitiful imitation of Alan's Piedmont, Carolina accent. Bear with me, here we go. So Alan, how did the garden get started? Well, I'd been a volunteer at Blevins House for a couple of years, visiting folks, doing small things to make their lives a bit more bearable. Then Shirley showed up. Shirley was an old mountain woman. I think she might have gotten HIV from prostitution. She probably came here through the AIDS clinic at Duke. They referred most of the residents to the house. At that point, 1989, there weren't adequate services up there in the mountains for her. When she came to the house, which was a very pleasant, middle-class ranch home, she just sat on the edge of the couch for about a month, like she was just waiting for the next Greyhound bus to take her back to the mountains. She was so ill at ease in what to her was this palatial home. I suspect that she had lived only in little cabins and trailers, but she took to lining the porch with coffee cans full of houseplants. She was turning it into home. I had no idea how old she was. She looked ancient, but I remember at some point seeing her age and being surprised at how much younger she was than I thought. We all knew that Shirley loved plants. Her birthday was May 1st, and so everybody gave her houseplants. I gave her a few seed packets, and that's how the garden got started. The first year, it was just a little patch with some zinnias and a few other things. Shirley would sit up on the porch. She didn't have any energy to work in the garden, and from there, she bossed me around. Anyway, that first year, the garden was for Shirley, and I planted her zinnias because they were so colorful. Shirley took great pride in the garden. By fall, we had all kinds of beautiful things in bloom. Shirley died that next spring. Alan, to what extent were the folks who lived at Blevins House involved with the garden? Well, not all that much. Besides Shirley, there were Ken and Roosevelt. Ken loved the garden. He'd grown up at an orphanage at, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Culebedi Springs. They made the kids do field work. I think it was a strawberry farm, so he had this almost instinctive relationship with the garden. He was there a couple of years. Roosevelt was from here in Durham, but he had worked in New York polishing diamonds at Tiffany's. At some point, he started coming out and puttering around, chopping weeds, clearing beds. He was gaunt and didn't have much energy. Still, he was more grounded and less disabled by AIDS than many other residents. He was on oxygen 24 hours a day, but he had a portable tank, so he could come preside. I told him he was our patron saint. So many people, once they were diagnosed, gave up. He had no patience with that. Others came out to look at the garden from time to time, but Shirley, Ken, and Roosevelt, they were the mainstays. Why do you think the garden was important to the residents who did participate? I'm not sure. Maybe there in the garden, they took some solace in the cycles of life, death, and regeneration. Well then, what did volunteering at Blevins House and tending the garden mean to you? Especially in those early years, I think the benefits of volunteerism were at least as much for the volunteers as for the people who lived there. We all needed reassurance. We all needed some sense of, well, there's something I can do. Everybody felt defeated. I think all of us were searching for a way to understand this epidemic as something other than terrible judgment and Holocaust, as something more than tragedy. Alan, any final words on Shirley's garden? Just that maybe sometimes in a small way, a vase of zinnias or a sack of okra matter? I'm going to break script here now to tell you a little more about Alan and the AIDS work that he and many others did in the early years. I'm doing this because Alan was adamant that we put the story of Shirley's Garden in a larger context. I'll try to do that by making 2 points. First, besides being the garden guy at Blevins House, Alan provided support to people with AIDS as an AIDS buddy for the Lesbian and Gay Health Project. In fact, Alan was buddy to the Health Project's first AIDS client, a guy named Michael, who moved back to North Carolina from San Francisco to be closer to his family when he died. I tell you this because I want to note something about the support Alan and many other gay men provided people with AIDS, something that made that work more pressing and more frightening. Many of us were wounded healers. That is, we were caregivers, but some of us were already grieving the loss to AIDS of someone we loved, as was the case with Alan. Others of us were at risk or infected ourselves, and as we cared for the sick and the dying, we knowingly watched our own future unfold in another's illness. My second point is this. Besides providing support to people with AIDS, Alan was also active on the political side of AIDS work. For instance, he was one of many who protested the high price of AZT right here in the park at Burroughs Wellcome. That political work was critical too, because in those early years, there was very little positive attention paid to AIDS by government, by churches, by civic groups. Gay men had to do just about everything by and for ourselves with critical support from lesbian sisters and straight allies. This included not just educating one another about HIV and supporting one another through illness and death, but also shaming drug companies for pricing their meds beyond the reach of those who needed them, and protesting against the government for its inaction, lack of funding, slow approval of medications, and discriminatory policies. It was all of a piece, educating, supporting, protesting, and in Alan's case, gardening. And many of us moved pretty seamlessly from one to the other. So that's some of the larger context, but I don't want it to overshadow the focus of this presentation, which was the beautiful garden Alan tended for many years, a garden he created, in his words, to make life a bit more bearable for those near the end of their AIDS journey. It was a unique offering from someone all who know him would agree is a uniquely gifted individual. Thank you.
Thank you. So if y'all want to find Sarah Beth, we might have time for one question. I will kick things off by asking, how did the development of AZT change AIDS treatment, since that was developed here, right here?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it didn't change it that much because ADT was far from a silver bullet. It had a positive effect on people's health for a very short period of time. But it sort of launched efforts to find many other AIDS drugs that eventually led to HAART, which has turned HIV into a chronic disease.
One question. Here we go.
Hi, Laquan Black, entrepreneur here tonight, so thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask, what happened to the Blevins Garden? Where is that today, and are there any people within the HIV/AIDS communities that can still benefit from its blooming?
Where is the garden today?
Well, Blevins House is no longer. an AIDS residence because there isn't much need for AIDS residences anymore. It was founded as a place for people at the end stage of their journey, and now, thanks to HEART, most people, not everybody by far, but most people are able to live long and pretty healthy lives. I'm not exactly sure when it closed down, but it's not here.
Thank you, Dr. David Jolly, everyone. Thank you, Alan. Okay, and now for our next speaker. She is a philosopher who teaches bioethics and professionalism for medical students and residents, as well as master's students. She also serves as a clinical ethics consultant for Houston Methodist Hospital. Some recent projects focus on ethical issues in fetal therapy, utility of genetic testing in the context of childhood cancer, the impact of disclosing information about dementia risk, and medical decision-making at the end of life. Please welcome Dr. Janet Malik.
All right, thank you for the invitation to be here. Today I want to fill you in on what is one of the most controversial hot topics in clinical ethics, and it's also probably something that I'm going to guess most of you have never heard of. It is a procedure that is used to procure organs that will be used for transplantation. It's called normothermic regional perfusion, or NRP. Sorry, I'll stand back here so you guys can see. NRP consists of a process that when it's been decided that a patient is going to have their life support withdrawn due to the decision either of the patient themselves, more commonly the family. They say, for whatever reason, due to their underlying medical condition, often involving neurologic issues of some sort, brain injury or other types of chronic diseases, that they are going to withdraw life support from a patient, generally who's on a ventilator, but they want to donate their organs for transplantation for others. So this process involves taking the patient into an operating room, removing them from the ventilator so that their heart, and lung function stop. There is a 2 to 5 minute waiting period that is meant to determine for sure that the patient is no longer able to breathe or their heart is functioning on their own. At that point, they take cannulas and insert them into the patient's veins and arteries, and they clamp the veins or the arteries that supply blood to the patient's brain. At that point, once they're certain that there cannot be brain perfusion reestablished because of these clamps, they put the patient on a heart-lung machine and restart their heart and circulate blood through their body so that the organs can be preserved in better condition for transplantation. This is called NRP, normothermic regional perfusion. Some of you are nodding. I think maybe you've heard of it, but others look a little bit afraid of this procedure, understandably so. So in order to really understand how we got to this point that we're considering NRP for normal practice, we need to understand a bit about the history behind it. So in the 1950s, we saw great advances in life-sustaining technologies. We saw the mass production of a ventilator that is going to allow us to keep patients alive even when in other situations previous to that time they would not have been able to survive. This also caused some ethical questions, though, when we started to see patients that were able to maintain their cardiopulmonary function due to the ventilator support, but they never woke up. And people started saying, what should we do with these patients? At the same time, in the next decade, we saw huge advances in organ transplantation. During the 60s was when we saw the very first kidney, liver, lung, heart transplants. They weren't super successful, but they did offer hope for future patients. So with these two things coming together, we're seeing a need for more organs, and we're having these patients who are in these, what are they called, a hopeless coma. And then there's these dilemmas that started to raise with what should we do with these patients? And maybe we could use their organs to help save other people's lives. So in 1968, they convened a committee, which of course is what you do when you have interesting ethical questions, at Harvard, and they were supposed to determine the definition of what they called brain death, which was going to be an approach that they could use to ensure that we were all clear and on the same page about when and how one could declare brain death about a patient and then use those organs to be transplanted for somebody else. So they were very explicit that they wanted to address the problems of the hopelessly unconscious patient, as well as prevent controversies about organ transplantations. The result of the committee was not a definition of death, it was a definition of what they called irreversible coma, which really didn't solve the problem at all. However, it did conclude that a patient who is in an irreversible coma is, for all intents and purposes, dead, and so that their organs can be transplanted. So they essentially just sidestepped the real philosophical question about what is death and when is a person really dead. They just said we can choose to use their organs under these certain circumstances. Okay, right, yeah, I know. That's so ongoing debate. In the 1970s, this was not resolved. The questions continued. They convened another commission. Excellent, another good idea. At this time, it was a president's commission, and they came to the conclusion that they actually offered a substantive philosophical assessment, which is that once a patient, once their brain is not functioning in a way that it can integrate the body's different functions or organizations, it doesn't count as an organism anymore. And so without adequate brain function, we can declare a patient to be dead. And this was actually instantiated into what we call the Uniform Determination of Death Act. So when you have a tough philosophical question, might as well just pass a law and try to solve that problem. So that's what they did. And they declared that an individual who sustained either irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory functions or irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, including the brainstem, is dead. And this actually solved quite a few problems. It was adopted by just about every state in the United States, and it provided this opportunity for kind of a tenuous consensus through the 1980s. We sort of developed this mantra that brain death is death. We don't call it heart death, we don't call it lung death, so we shouldn't call it brain death. Death is just death. In response to some of these sort of concerns, we said, well, we're not going to call it brain death anymore because that kind of qualifies it. We're going to call it death by neurological criteria. And under this sort of approach, we were able to achieve organ transplantation for many people. The organs were good quality because they were taken after the person had still had a good circulation in their body. There were still a few, and the ethicists, not the legal folks, but the ethics folks came up with what they call the dead donor rule, which is saying we should only harvest organs from, you're not supposed to say harvest, procure organs from a patient when they have been declared dead. So this was a fairly happy place that everybody was at. There were still a couple of questions about whether we should be considering only higher brain criteria so that you didn't have to have the whole brain not be functioning, but that was largely rejected. Some raised concerns about residual functioning of the brain because there's still hormonal function, electrical activity that goes on. But again, those were sort of put aside. And so we had this fairly good set of agreement until we get to 2013. In 2013, we had the Jahai McMath case, which is something that some of you might be aware of. Jahai was a 13-year-old girl who went into a hospital in California for a tonsillectomy. Unfortunately, she had several complications that involved bleeding, a loss of blood to her brain, and she had a cardiac arrest. They did CPR and resuscitated her, but by the time they got her heart started again, she had had irreparable brain damage. The doctors in California declared her dead by neurologic criteria. Her mother did not accept that diagnosis and was able to get her flown across the state, across the country, to New Jersey, which is the only state that allows this exception, where if someone objects to the declaration of brain death by neurologic criteria, they're allowed to keep her alive. She lived for another 5 years. It was discovered later that there was some brain activity. It was minor, but it raised questions about the original diagnosis. So as you might imagine, this case threw the whole medical community into disarray about the definition of death, right? If we can't reliably declare death, how can we say somebody has died by these criteria? So this controversy has continued. In 2020, they convened an entire summit of people internationally to try to figure this out, and they were still unable to come to what they considered to be an appropriate definition of death. So that's where we are. When we're thinking about NRP is ethically dependent on this idea of death by neurologic criteria because it is only effective because we're restarting a person's heart and lungs. We are assuming that the only way that we can ethically do that is if they are brain dead. But of course, NRP is caught up in this whole question of what is brain death and whether it's acceptable. There's also a lot of debate about the fact that there can be a lot of good done by using NRP. It's consistent with the reasons and the sort of intentions that patients have when they agree to give their organs. They want their organs to be given to somebody else for something good to be done with the fact that they have died. And we also see that this process has increased organ availability and quality. On the other hand, it might be violating what we call this dead donor rule, which has been put in place by ethicists in order to say that we would never take organs from somebody who isn't actually dead because we want people to trust that we're not going to compromise their medical care based on the fact that we want to procure their organs. So this is an ongoing controversy. I wish I could say I had a particular answer for you on it. I don't, but it's something that you should be aware of. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have an audience question. I think we got time for one audience question. Over here. Sarah Beth's coming to you.
Hi, Roman. I'm interested, what is the percentage of people actually get their organs procured that way?
Right now, it's quite a small number because only a few hospitals in the US are doing this. More and more larger hospital systems are considering doing some version of this procedure anyway. It has been done in Europe for a long time, though, for several decades.
Dr. Janet Malik, thank you so much. All right, and we have arrived at our fourth and final speaker. She is a Raleigh-based documentarian and regional storyteller dedicated to uncovering the rich, untold histories of communities in the American South and beyond. Her debut documentary short, Quilt Journeys, premiered at the 2019 Black Star Film Festival, and her essay, A Black Woman Made This Beer, was awarded Best National International Reporting from the North American Guild of Beer Writers in 2022. Her current project is This Belongs to Us. It focuses on the overlooked contributions of Black women in American beer history, weaving together themes of culture, identity, and community. Give it up for Tinu Diver.
Right, mic check. All right, hello everyone. Good evening. My name is Tinu Diver. I'm really excited to be part of the RTP 180, the history of. And tonight, the history that I want to talk with y'all about is the history of Black women and their contributions to American beer history. So first, we need to go a little ways back and talk about African women as what I call the original brewmasters. So when you think of, your modern, brewery or tap room, it doesn't look anything like this photo for a lot of reasons. And And you know what was really interesting is that I grew up with a pretty Afrocentric orientation around beer and beer history. I'm the daughter of Nigerian immigrants, and my parents have a family friend who works for Nigerian breweries. So the first brewer I ever met was a black African man. I knew because of him that there's more Guinness that's drunk in Nigeria than in Ireland. True, it's a fact. And they actually have the second largest Guinness production plant in Nigeria. Yeah, isn't that interesting? I also grew up knowing about the history and the legacy of Ethiopians and Egyptians and South Africans brewing, and understood the role of things like beer and spirits and fermented beverages in kind of larger cultural milestones in how that was used in ancestral worship or in celebrations. And so as particularly when I moved back to North Carolina in 2014 and started noticing the space that breweries took up, both physically, geographically, but also culturally, and noticing how often those spaces didn't look like some of the communities that I came from, and are oftentimes were attracting clientele that looked really different than the surrounding community. I started thinking and wondering about, you know, why was that the case, that this craft that's been with us since the beginning of civilization seemed to not reflect always the vast array of folks that have been a part of that legacy. And so I think one of the reasons about that might be kind of this idea of how we think about the archive, air quotes, archive, and how we think about what references we use to kind of validate history. One of the interesting sources of archival information that I have come to learn about working on this project have been runaway slave ads. So this is an excerpt from an ad that was actually placed in a publication called the Raleigh News and Record, which is the precursor to the Raleigh News and Observer. And this ad talks about a formerly enslaved woman from Franklin County, North Carolina, Patsy Young, so not that far from where we are. And one of the interesting things about this ad is that her enslaver, one of the ways that her enslaver described her was as a master brewer. And so it's been interesting over the last few years to kind of see in real time how the research around the contributions of Black women across the centuries and across the diaspora are being discovered in new, in my case, a very unexpected way. So when I think about the legacy of Black women's contributions to beer hiding in plain sight, one of the things that I really love about this project is how global of an item beer is, but how local of a story this is. The women that I've been documenting with have all connections in North Carolina, which is great. And this is one of them, Patricia Henry. Miss Henry is a native of Reidsville, North Carolina. Miss Henry is known for many things, but one of them is that she ran the Miller Coors plant that used to be located in Eden, North Carolina. So geography-wise, folks, we're Greensboro, go north, kind of near the Virginia border. One of the other really fascinating things about Miss Henry, she's in her 70s now. She's no longer brewing. She's retired, enjoying her retirement. But she was the first, not only Black woman, but she was the first woman to be a brewmaster at a major macro brewery. So not a craft brewery, but a macro brewery. She's a Bennett Belle. She graduated from Bennett College. And so she's also a product of the really rich HBCU ecosystem that we have here in North Carolina that we're so proud of. And next, okay, great. And then another aspect of this legacy is another brewer by the name of Celeste Beatty. Celeste is someone that I came to know through a kind of chance interaction a few years ago at the Hayti Heritage Film Festival. I was there watching a film that another friend had in the festival. We took a little break to get some refreshments, and someone was pouring beer. And even at that time, I didn't fancy myself that much of a beer drinker, but was like, yeah, we'll try it. And the person pouring the beer said, this beer was brewed by a black woman. And we were like, really? And so that's when I came to learn. And the beer that they were pouring was from Harlem Brewing. Harlem Brewing is Celeste's brewery. Celeste is from Winston-Salem. She started her brewery in Harlem, but has been back and forth between North Carolina and New York in expanding her production. Celeste is kind of known as the first black woman to own her own craft brewery. And now I add this asterisk, that we know of, because as we're beginning to learn more and more about contributions of black women, I think that's important distinction. And then Brianna Brake is a brewer I've gotten to spend a lot of time with in the last few years. Bree is, I need to, make the other shout out. Celeste graduated from Shaw, so that's very important to highlight as well. But Bree is a Durham native, and met her years ago at a black beer festival in Pittsburgh, and looked down at her business card and saw that she was operating in Rocky Mount, and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. But Bree's brewery, Spaceway, I think really speaks to this theme about how black women are imagining and seeing themselves in spaces that they traditionally have not been viewed in. So, tonight, I'm sure some of us might enjoy some beer, maybe, if the bar opens back up again. I do want to encourage and invite us all to really think about the history of the things that we often take for granted, the stories that are behind them that we might not even realize. And I think we should all, cheers to, the legacy of these stories that might otherwise be lost. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tinu. I want to raise your hand so Sarah Beth can find you. And in the meantime, let me ask this question. What was the most surprising or impactful discovery you made during the research for This Belongs to Us?
Well, as part of my research, I actually took the commercial brewing class at Wake Tech. Shout out to Wake Tech, which is... Yeah, Wake Tech, hey! Which is, for anyone who has any nascent interest in brewing, it's just a great program, and Clay, who runs the program there, does a phenomenal job. And I think what I learned was I just gained a whole deeper level of respect for how hard of a process brewing is. And so it's not sexy. It looks sexy when you go to a brewery, but yeah, the sausage being made is not that sexy. But and so I just have a lot of respect for folks who choose to pursue that path and are able to build a viable, brewing business. It's really impressive.
Hi, Tinu.
Hey, Mike.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I know you as a very important leader for DHIC, but I think we're all wondering when we're going to be able to hear about your brewery that's going to be opening up in the future. Is that going to happen?
Well, I've never seen it. There's no plans for brewery, y'all. No, I've definitely lend my labor to friends who do brew, help with canning and brew days and things like that, which is fun. But yeah, I don't know. Aluminum is really expensive right now.
Hi, good evening. Great presentation, thank you. My name is Jaap, innovation consultant and beer lover. Question, how difficult was it to dig and get this information, and where did you go to do this research?
Oh, that's a great question. Initially, I think with any project, you have this idea, and you just don't, it's just a thing. You don't know if it's there. And so, typically when you're working on a film project, research and development is like this concrete, phase that happens, kind of in pre-production, before you go in production. But for me, I feel like I've been doing research and development all throughout. I'm still in production on this project. But it was kind of like once one thread started pulling, the whole sweater started unraveling, right? So it was like finding about Celeste, going to Fresh Fest, meeting Bree, and then it just snowballed. And I think for me, it was really when I went to Fresh Fest, which was at the time it was the only and the largest black beer festival. There's another beer festival now called Barrel and Flow that kind of morphed from that. But that, to me, it was like I felt like this anthropologist that had like found this, I don't know, civilization. It was like, oh my God, this whole like, you know, beer culture and, you know, whatever. And then I've really enjoyed the archival piece. And so like I've gotten to spend time up in Harlem at the Schomburg, which is kind of a very well-known archive for Black history and Black images. Again, learning about things like the story of Patsy Young and just thinking differently about like what the archive is and that could be. And I would say a lot of it is just one of the, you know, I started working on this project right before the pandemic and through the pandemic, and one of the things that the pandemic offered me was the opportunity to really build relationships with the audience for the project in a way that I don't think I would have. And so that getting to know the community of beer, like folks who just love beer, has been really a big part of helping me navigate and do a lot of that research. It's, you know, there's just been a lot of great relationships that I've been able to form. The Smithsonian has a beer kind of museum, and so I got to know the curator there. I've gotten to know curators at other places in like Chicago and other kind of major beer hubs. So it's been, the community has been a big part of the success of this project. Yeah.
Tinu Diver, everybody. Thank you. All right, well, I know we're all thirsty now. The bar will open back up in 1 minute. We hope you enjoyed RTP 180 tonight. Once again, yes, thank you. Once again, let's give it up for our presenting sponsor, RTI International. Let's give it up for our speakers. And I want to remind you, we are quarterly now, so our next event is going to be February 20th, and the topic is going to be ag tech, so save the date for that. Thanks, y'all, so much for being here. We're going to open the bar back up. Stay, network, and have a great holiday season. Thank you.